Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. Yeah, well, I was wanting to do an episode, and I can't believe we've never talked about this before, but do an episode about trust.
Oh, okay.
And how our trust is broken down as survivors, and how important trust is in all our relationships, and why it's such a problem for survivors. And I can't believe we've never really talked about it. We've talked around this issue, but it's such a foundational part of relationships is trust. But I know for me, trust was really difficult through a lot of my life. And so, yeah, I think after 3 years, it's time to talk about trust.
So what do you see as your issue with trust?
Well, I've gotten a lot better.
You trusting or people trusting you?
For me, it was trusting people. And part of how I had to overcome that, I believe, was becoming trustworthy, because I think a lot of my struggles were also with being trustworthy because I didn't feel like I mattered. So I didn't feel like what I did mattered. So I wasn't very trustworthy. And in order to build trust in myself, and I had to learn how to trust myself, because I didn't even, I would set goals and have plans and not follow through. I was very unreliable for a long time, and it didn't matter to me. So nothing really mattered. So I wasn't reliable because I didn't care. And so in order to build trust in myself, I had to start caring about things and caring about myself, and making sure that I took care of things that mattered. So I think trust is it is a two-way relationship. You have to, in order to trust someone, you have to be trustworthy.
Well, and as victims, choosing to care is the first step, because if you don't care, then what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
Because caring means you could get hurt.
Yeah, and that's where it's hard to start, is that fear of being hurt again. And for survivors, I think that's one of the hardest steps, is putting your trust in someone again after you've been hurt, and knowing that you can be hurt again. And I think the way to start is just by taking small steps of trusting, just allowing people into, small steps at a time, and gaining trust in them by allowing them to know more about you, or spend more time with them, or doing things that involve trusting someone, but just taking small steps, not giant leaps at first. I think some of the issues with having trauma in your life and losing trust is you never want to let anyone in, and you become completely reliant upon yourself. You don't trust anyone, so you have to do everything, because you don't think you can't trust anyone else to do it. And so you have to allow people to do things with you, or to do things for you, and taking small steps. And even if it doesn't work, even if someone does, disappoint you, don't take it so personally, but just people aren't always reliable, and you have to give them grace sometimes.
What I see a lot in the recovery world, and we know, like, a lot of people, if they have trauma, they'll go to drugs and alcohol. And what they don't understand is a lot of times they'll be in groups or even in a coaching relationship, and they don't show up,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't understand well, what's the big deal? It's only hurting me. And so part of trusting and building trust is actually understanding that your presence makes a difference. If you make a commitment to be somewhere, you be there. If you make a commitment to do something, you do it. And there just seems to be kind of this, what does it matter attitude. And so that's again where that daily work on yourself starts to make a difference, because then you go, oh, I said I would show up. And even though it's just a group, and who cares if I'm there, I am part of a group, so it matters.
Yeah. And that's an important way of starting to regain trust, is to be trustworthy. And by taking responsibility for your actions, making sure that if you commit to something, you will, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone, allowing yourself to talk about your feelings, or, if someone has done something that's hurt your feelings, allowing yourself to actually tell them that, rather than being passive aggressive and just ghosting them or whatever. Taking the risk to tell them your feelings and share that with them. And that's building trust, because you have to take risks with someone to build trust with someone. I know for myself, I was not always real honest. And there came a point where I decided I need to be honest all the time. I need to quit this dishonesty stuff, because I didn't trust myself. I didn't like who I was, and I didn't trust myself. And in order to build trust in myself, I had to learn to be honest, even when I didn't want to be. And
Can we talk a little more about that? Because I think someone listening that may not be a survivor might not understand that we might lie about something as simple as what we ate for dinner if we think we're going to get judged for it. So can you talk more about being honest and what that really means?
Yeah, I don't exactly know why all the time I wasn't honest, but I know it was basically because I didn't like who I was, so I wanted to make myself look better. I didn't like, and so there were things about myself I didn't feel good about, so I would lie about them in order to make myself look better, but I never felt better about it. I always knew that was false. I always knew that I was pretending to be something else because I didn't like who I was. And in order to really start to appreciate myself, I had to put out who I really was, even all the warts and scabs and all that. And I had to show up, and even when I didn't want to, I had to just be honest. And it's not always easy, especially at first, when your go-to is to put on a front that says, oh, everything's great, I do everything great, and everything's great in my life. Well, when that was your go-to, it's hard to show the ugliness.
Well, and also when we're stuck in the victim role, then we tend to, I hate to just say lie, because sometimes that just seems like so blatant, but we see it in kids with trauma. And so you think about these adults that have not shared their story. Now they're suddenly getting help, but they've had to use lying to cover up, maybe even to be safe for whatever reason. So they're behaving as that child who had to lie to stay safe, or in their mind, in their world. And so now we're adults. And I can't tell you how many people who are in recovery that are saying, man, I had to quit lying. I would lie about the most stupid things because it was just knee jerk, because I thought I was being accused, or I thought they wouldn't like me, or it would make me look bad. And even there's this level of lying where we're not actually lying, but we're not being truthful.
Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with trust. When we don't trust people, we don't want them to know who we really are. When we don't have and when we feel like we can't rely on them, or they're just going to hurt us, we're not going to allow them near us so they can't hurt us. And I think that's a huge issue for survivors, is we don't want to be hurt again. So we put up these barriers, and we just don't trust anyone. And we become so self-reliant that we don't allow people near us enough to risk being hurt. But every relationship needs trust. Every relationship depends on trust. And if we don't trust anyone, and if we don't trust ourselves, then there's no way to form a healthy relationship until you can have that trust with yourself. I think it starts with ourselves. We have to learn to be trustworthy. And that means you also have to sit with your ugliness. You have to sit with your feelings, the things you feel about yourself, the things that you don't necessarily like about yourself, but you're working on, our issues. We have to sit with our issues and understand them and be aware of them so we can share that with others. And then when, as we're doing that, we can start to build trust with others by allowing them to have more, basically giving them grace in our lives and allowing them to do things in our lives that we wouldn't, that didn't feel safe before.
It's allowing access. And when you think of the bigger picture, the picture you painted was when we put up the walls and the barriers because we don't trust, we don't let anyone in. And I remember our good friends Herb and Ruth used to call it sinful self, when you rely on yourself, when you just, I can do it myself. Because what happens is, that's not how we were created. We were created for relationship. But when we're afraid to let people see us, then we're not allowing access. And I hear people all the time saying things like, well, they won't be my friend or whatever. And often it's because we're putting out those vibes. So when we talk about, remember how I always say self-healing is an act of community service. Mm-hmm. When we don't heal ourselves, we don't get coaching, counseling, group help, then we don't let people in, but we're mad that we don't have access to people. And it's really starting with us because of the vibe we're putting out. And so when we do that work and we start to look inside and we start to be okay with what we see or think is our ugliness, then we can begin to embrace it and give our own self grace. And then the walls start to come down and then we can let people in and we can start to see, hey, this trust thing maybe isn't so scary. But when we're so isolated and we've got our walls up, trust is terrifying.
Yeah. And it's also a way of, I think for me, it was a way of building myself up, was just not trusting anyone else, trying to be that lone wolf, that strong warrior, not relying on anyone. And for men, I think that is an issue, is we want to stand strong and not rely, be self-dependent, don't trust anyone. That's kind of a male thing in a way, because you're trying to protect that kid that was hurt.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, that toxic maleness is like the messages. And then you feel like you've got to be tough and maybe I should have fought the predator off or all these crazy messages. And so those are the bricks of the wall that we've built. And so deconstructing it really takes a level of really working with someone so that you can start to look at your thoughts and go, oh, wow, I thought I had to, conquer the world all by myself. I had no idea I could do it with friends and family and partners. And we don't have to totally be in competition with other men. We can actually help each other.
Yeah. It takes vulnerability, which is one of those words that men find terrifying. Mm-hmm. And it is scary for men often. Mm-hmm. Vulnerability is very scary.
And if you're vulnerable in the wrong way, the wrong place, you can get hurt. And I think that's where sharing your story with somebody who can handle it so that you will get the right response and then you can start your recovery journey is really kind of a big deal too. It's like those are the first steps of gaining trust, is when you're vulnerable. And I remember Nathan, he was like, I'm never telling anybody. And that girlfriend of his just sat down and she's like, what gives? And he finally shared, and she was somebody that could handle and help him get where he needed and get the help he needed. But until then, he thought he had to be tough. He thought he had to carry this himself. He had no idea, no clue that was what was causing all of his, behavior that was pushing people away.
Yeah. And we do push people away when we don't have trust in our lives. And we have to, because if you don't trust them, we can't, it seems so simple, but it's so profound that trust is such a foundation. And yet for survivors, our trust has been destroyed. And how do we rebuild that? How do we regain trust in ourselves and in others? It is such a foundational step for having healthy relationships, but for especially survivors, it's such a difficult step.
It is. And, for AA, the reason it works is that higher power. And for me, a story that's really been resonating, I've heard it my whole life, was the story when Jesus was on earth and this woman had had a bleeding her whole life. She'd gone to every doctor, spent all her money, and she reached out and she touched his robe because she knew that she knew that she knew if she could just touch his robe, she would be healed. So she believed. She had trust and faith because of what she had seen and heard. And when Jesus turned around and said, somebody touched me, all of his disciples were like, duh, we're in a crowd. Everyone's, but Jesus said, no, I felt it. And there was that moment where she trusted enough to reach out, but did she trust him enough to then say, it was me?
Yeah.
And she did. And she said, it was me. And I think that that's when we put the voice, we say, I will trust, or I do, I trust you, God, bring the right people. And then we voice that. It was me. I do trust you. I do trust you, even when we're not seeing the results yet, but knowing that when we start to take those steps to build trust, if it starts with God, with your higher power, with the universe, and then it starts to move to people, that then you're on that trajectory. But it has to start with us. It doesn't start with somebody trusting us, because often that feels, when somebody wants our trust, we feel overwhelmed, like, oh, they're taking from us, because we don't understand trust. So when we begin to figure that out and take the steps for ourselves, then we can open the doors for a life of trust with our partner, our family, our children, our friends.
Yeah. The first steps are the hardest.
Always.
Especially when you don't feel safe. And you don't know how to find the safe person. That I think is one of the critical parts of this. It's important to work on ourselves, become trustworthy, but then how do we find the person we can trust? That's someone that we can rely upon to open up to and allow access to us. How do we know? Because we've learned that no one's trustworthy. So how do we find someone that is trustworthy? How do we know if they're going to be?
Yeah.
And the truth is, you don't. So right. I think you have to allow access to people you feel that are important in your lives, and also allow them to fail sometimes. As long as it's not a catastrophic, betrayal or something. People do fail. We all fail. I fail. We all fail. But don't take it as a complete, see that they can't be trusted. I'll never trust anyone. You don't want to let it ruin everything by having a failure. You have to just keep moving on. And
I think those first steps are so scary. So if we find a professional in the beginning, if we find a counselor, somebody that's qualified that we can work with, then as we start to learn how to trust others, we've got someone to come back and, say, hey, this did or didn't work. And they help us learn to trust our instinct. They help us walk through it and give us the guidance that we need, or help us find books. But when we find that first person, and if it's a professional, it's going to give us, and I know not everybody can afford counseling, but, there are lots of services that will help people. But if you can find somebody that in the beginning understands trauma, then they're going to be able to walk you through the next stages, rather than you go and you find somebody and you tell them and you get the bad result and you go back into your cave for another 20 years,
Yeah. And
like for you, I know you found a counseling, you found a group, and that was what helped you sort of get your legs so that you could. And then you were able to talk about it, reach out and find more help and more resources because you found a place that was safe for you.
Yeah. The counselor was important, but I think also the men's group was huge because it was, with a counselor, it's pretty easy to open up to. You're not going to be judged. They're only a very limited part of your life and relationship. You have a very limited relationship. So the importance isn't as big. If you spill the beans and they react weird, then it's like, oh, well, you don't have to worry about it. It's not like they're a real important part of your life as far as, relationships. You have basically a professional relationship with them. But with the men's group, these were guys I didn't know and had to form a relationship. So we had to learn how to build trust. And that was a huge aspect of that at the beginning, is here's 5 guys I've never really known before. And we were going to talk about things that were really intimate and scary. So we had to build trust with each other. And then once we were able to do that, it grew as far as we were able to share more with each other. I became closer friends with some of them. And so our relationships grew, and so did our trust. And that's when I started to have those feelings about myself of, I don't like the way I am as far as not being trustworthy, not being reliable, not being honest. And so I started changing who I was because I wanted to be more trustworthy with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really is finding that safe place. And we've seen people that have finally shared their story, but they haven't got help or support. Mm-hmm. And they feel better because they've shared their story. But it's not until we start to work on those things that our life can really start to get better. And so I kind of like the fast track of find somebody and find a group or support group, or they have them for men, they have them for women, and starting to find a place where you can get the support and get moving on it. Because once you realize that what happened to you wasn't right, it's easy then to kind of just maybe be bitter, to be like, well, how come all these other kids got a good, nice life and I got just what I got? But I know, for me, being able to be in relationship with a counselor and be in relationship with different types of groups. I remember this one group I was in. It was with a women's housing, and I was actually in the group, not leading it. And, one woman would be like, well, when I was a hoe, I used to do this thing. And all I could think is if this group would have been in the church, she might have got judged, but it was a safe place. And being in some sort of group, even if it's 6 weeks, 12 weeks, can make a real difference, because when you feel seen and heard and believed, it begins to change you. And when we're able to start, working on ourselves, everything starts with working on ourselves.
Yeah. And there are groups available as a survivor. There's Celebrate Recovery. If you're struggling with dependency issues, there's all the NAAA and so
There's
forth.
There's a new one I just learned of that's national. It's called Reboot Recovery. It started for veterans and then first responders, and now it's for anyone who's experienced trauma. And they have a 12-week program. It's Reboot Recovery, and it's national. So you can go online and find something near you. And it walks you through trauma and how to just work through your trauma. And then who knows, you may become a leader and you may start a group. So,
but I think that's a great place to do it, because like I said, when I was in my men's group, it was a struggle at first because we were learning to trust, but then that growing experience of learning how to trust enabled me to have closer relationships with others, with the people in my lives, and learn how to also what mattered to me in my life, and why I was unhappy with some of the things in my life, some of my issues, and it made me want to work on them and change them.
Mm-hmm. And that's really a beautiful thing when all of a sudden you've gone from being isolated, which we feel like happened to us, but it's often what we do. And then you start to be able to feel like you can be honest with the people around you. And, for men, it might be more of an identity. Maybe for women, it's more of I don't want to be in trouble. When you think about kids, they lie to not be in trouble, right? They lie because they don't want to be restricted or grounded. And so, when you talk about a kid with trauma and then they become an adult, and, we saw this at the women's shelter, somebody would use a lot of creamer in their coffee, and you'd look over and smile at them and they'd be like, oh, sorry, make up some big story about the creamer. It's like, right? But they don't know that they're not going to be judged. And so it really, I think for anybody who's got trauma, it's a natural thing to distrust and feel like people are going to come against you rather than be for you.
Yeah. And that's one of the issues with not having trust in your life. When you don't trust others, you also feel like no one's going to trust you, because that's just the worldview you have. And so you feel apologetic all the time, or you feel like you're not trustworthy. You're not worthy of being trusted. And so there's this back and forth of you can't trust anyone, but they can't trust you either, because you're not going to be reliable or faithful or there's so many issues that really depend on trust. And yet, if you can't trust anyone, if you just put up those walls and say, no one else is worthy, then we're never going to have a real healthy relationship with anyone, including ourselves, actually.
Well, and what my breakthrough was when I was a single mom, I was so self-sufficient. It's sinful self-sufficiency, right? I can do it myself. I was so self-sufficient that when I needed help, my kids wanted to play sports and I couldn't afford it, and I had to ask for help. So that was really hard for me. I would rather be helping someone than asking for help, but learning the power of asking for help. And then not only that, then receiving it. Because I have seen so many people that are still in that victim mode when you try to help them or give them some sort of support, and they just push against you and they don't want it. And they think you have ulterior motives. Why? Because they don't trust. So it's hard to help people who won't be helped. And so what happens is so I learned how to ask for help. I learned how to receive help as a single mom. So when I opened the day center for homeless women, I understood that if I asked for help, people would come and give and they would be blessed. And so I asked people, I said, hey, I've got this day center. Can you bring soup? Can you come hang out? Well, people would bring all this stuff and they would thank me. But that would not have happened had I not learned the lesson of how valuable it is to ask for help. And not totally rely on myself, and when you have kids, it's different because you will go without as a person. But when your kids are going to go without, that's a whole different story.
Yeah. But for men, it's harder because we don't ask for help. We really don't want to have help. We don't want to admit that, we need help. And so how do you counter that instinct, so to speak, that lesson we've been taught that men are supposed to stand alone, men are supposed to be strong, men are supposed to be dependable and not need help. It's countering those lessons we've been taught, and everyone needs help. Everyone needs help once in a while. You have to admit it though, and you have to be vulnerable. And for men, that's just such a huge risk.
Remember our friend Kevin that was a state trooper in California, and he goes and speaks to builders, construction workers, because that is an issue. And what's happening is rather than ask for help, the suicide rate is so high. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think this can be a movement, Kevin, of men learning that it's okay to ask.
You're actually becoming stronger by being vulnerable. You're becoming stronger by asking for help. It's a sign of strength to be vulnerable, to ask for help. And if you highlight that as I'm actually, by asking for help, I'm opening myself up to being honest, to being vulnerable, to being truthful. And those are really important qualities, but men don't highlight that. They highlight the qualities that are strong, that show that they're strong. But in reality, by being vulnerable, you're also being honest, you're being truthful, you're being trusting. And so, it's so important for men to unlearn the lessons that taught us not to trust anyone.
It's kind of redefining strength. So in a lot of my coaching classes, people have this idea of what success is. And so they can't see anything they've done as successful if it's not like they're on the stage or whatever they have determined is successful. So whatever has been taught as strength. So if we can redefine strength as being vulnerable, asking for help, letting people in, if we can start to redefine that, then we might be more willing.
Yeah, and you'll also become more empathetic towards people that need help when you realize you've needed help too. And, you've asked for help, you've allowed people to support you, then you're more empathetic and you're more likely to support others as well. And so, we need to redefine what it means to be strong.
And even when we talk about telling our story, I deal with a lot of people, and I'll tell you, women will get on our podcast and tell their story. There's a lot of men that we've asked or that we would love to have share their story. And it just seems like it's so much harder for men. And so I kudos to the ones who have shared. And honestly, the ones that struggle, I pray for them, because I know until they tell their story somewhere, somehow, they're going to be in bondage.
Yeah.
And that strength really is the letting go, the asking for help, the taking the next step. And even in business, when you're going to make a new move, you're going to take a risk, you're going to be scared, and that's a good sign. So if you're scared and it feels like a big risk, that could be a really good sign that that's the next for you. The next step is to ask for help or share your story or do that thing that you're terrified to do.
Yeah. And frankly, I know for me, it was scary. And that shows that you're doing something that's not easy.
Right.
I think that's important, is when you're taking these little steps of trust, to be aware of how it feels, how you're feeling, and what it feels like when you do it, and also what it feels like after you do it. You know, what are the feelings you're having when you're taking that risk? Are you scared? Are you mad because you have to do it? Are you, what are your feelings? And then what are your feelings when it's happening? And then after, what does it feel like after you took that little step and trusted someone and was vulnerable? Did it feel good, or were you scared afterwards because you're afraid that something's going to happen? Pay attention to your feelings during this, because like we've talked about, feelings are information, and they're telling you, what's going on inside when you're doing things. And so I think for me, it was important. It was really hard and really scary, but I felt really good afterwards. And I felt like I was actually getting stronger, or forming stronger relationships. And that was important to me, was to form better relationships, because I didn't like the way my relationships were. That was incentive for me to change.
Yeah. Was journaling part of your recovery journey?
Yeah, back then. I haven't been doing it as much now. I'm still kind of doing it, but it's not a daily thing. But back then it was a daily thing.
And that's a good place to start too. Maybe you can't really speak to a person, but to start writing those things down and getting out there how you feel, because that's what's going to make the difference. When everything's rolling around in your head, this is scientific, it won't file. But the minute we say it or write it, then our brain can begin to file it where it goes. And often as a coach, people will tell me things and they'll tell me this whole thing, and then they'll go, oh, I figured it out. And I haven't said a word. Why? Because when we speak it, our brain makes sense of it. And so journaling and speaking out these things will help us to begin to categorize it. And even that's where the healing can really start to happen.
Yeah, for me, especially when I was doing the work on myself and learning to trust myself and learning to be reliable and trustworthy, journaling was really important, because I couldn't lie to myself when I was journaling. I mean, I could, but being honest in that way made me face what was really going on. I couldn't lie to myself, so I had to face my issues and understand them, and made me want to address them.
Yeah. So there's so many ways to work on trust, but I think the biggest thing is recognizing it. And when you look around and you realize, hey, I'm trying to do this all myself, ask yourself, is that how you want to live your life? Do we want to shut people out, or do we want to let them in? And just knowing that it's scary. And when you think about in any relationship, when there's a conflict and you have to work it out, some people just walk away, but if you work it out, often it's a lot of misunderstandings. And once you work through it, it can be such a beautiful thing. And so when we're coming at it from our trauma response, which is mistrust, blaming, and assuming that we've done everything wrong, then that's the place we're going to be. But if we're willing to trust the person that we love and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling, we might find out that either we were misunderstood or we were misunderstanding them. And so beginning to trust it's life.
That's what relationships are about. I think, if you realize that you do rely on yourself, you don't allow others to do things or take care of you, or, you won't let people help you. If you do feel like no one's safe, like you can't trust anyone, if you feel like you don't want to get close to people that you work with, or, other relationships, because you feel like you're going to be hurt, these are all trust issues. And I think it can start with working on yourself. How do you become more trustworthy? How do you be more reliant? How do you be more vulnerable and open and allow access? And, take small steps. Journaling is great. For me. It helped me, understand what my issues were and what the issues I wanted to deal with. And it did kind of force me to be honest with myself, which I realized I wasn't honest with myself, let alone others. And I wanted to change that. And so
one of the things I always say is whatever you want for yourself or for others, like I want people to trust me more. I always say, whatever you want, then you do that. And so that's what you're saying. So if you want that, then do that. I think we've all been around dogs that have been abused, and the nicest person in the world will walk up to pet them and they totally cower. And that's what the victim and the person who's been abused is doing. We're cowering from people that are really well-meaning. Like, it's easy to think everybody's going to hurt us, but when we can start to do the work and discern, some people are going to hurt us because that's life. But look, there's this whole bunch of people that are just reaching out their hand to pet me and be nice. Then our behavior changes and we are more open to loving relationships and friendships.
Yeah. And we are made for relationships. And relationships start with trust. I mean, there's really no way around that. Yeah. Relationships depend on trust. And without trust, you're not going to have much of a relationship. So that's where it all begins. And that's what it all depends upon. And that's why it's so hard for survivors, because our trust has been shattered. But it is possible to regain trust. And you can do it by starting on your own self and your own sense of being trustworthy. And then from there, allow others access to yourself, and being careful, of course, but being aware as well.
Mm-hmm. And again, trusting yourself is that, I always say my picker is broken because I didn't do well. But honestly, I've learned a lot. And so I can keep saying that, or I can say, wow, I've learned a lot. I can trust other people and I can trust myself to go, red flag or not red flag, but when we're still in victim mode, we can't trust ourselves even to make those decisions. But as we get well, then we trust ourselves and we can be like, yeah, that's not someone I'm going to hang around with, or that's definitely somebody that I feel like I'd like to learn to build trust with.
Yeah. Yeah. It all starts with just allowing little steps, allowing small baby steps of access and understanding how we feel when it happens. And then if it feels good, then you'll want to do it more. And I know for me, I started feeling better about myself because I was being more honest. I was being more trustworthy, and it allowed me to trust others. So it does happen. It takes a little time, and it takes, for men, it's very scary because, yes, you have to be vulnerable. You have to allow people to understand what you're feeling and what you're going through.
It actually takes strength and courage.
Strength and courage, which we don't celebrate that enough. That being vulnerable and being honest and open is courageous, is strong. But we don't celebrate that. That needs to change. That needs to be celebrated.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown's doing some really good work in that area, but it's a good step. And, it's a lot to think about, but everything always boils down to the little baby steps, the first action, telling your story, asking for help, being willing to do the work to trust yourself so that you can open the door to trust others. Little baby steps.
Yeah, but it matters so much.
It's life-changing.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful that there's hope.
Yeah, and you can have healthy relationships, which is what matters. Mm-hmm. Relationships are what we're here for. And so many of us as survivors were so isolated. We felt so isolated because we had to isolate. But imagine if you don't have to.
Yeah. That's not the way to stay safe, but it's all we've known. And so to redefine even what safety is just amazing. Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like our time is about up. So
shall we pray?
Yeah.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review. because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, especially for your relationship with us. Lord, you're always there for us. You're always available. You want to be in relationship with us, and you want us to trust you, Lord. And you've proven yourself worthy of trust by being faithful to us. And Lord, I just pray that you would show up in the lives of those who are listening and help them to regain their trust. And this is where we lost our internet and we dropped our audio. So the rest of the prayer was not recorded. I'm sorry about that, but if you're listening and you're a survivor, please know that we are praying for you, and we want to pray for you. If you have a prayer request, please let us know. You can contact us on Facebook Messenger or on our website. We would love to hear your story, and we would love to pray for you. We want you to know that you are not alone, and thank you for listening.